Yes, it's afternoon, by 10 minutes. Good afternoon. My name is Marty Minkoff. I'm the Supervisor of Service Planning with King County Metro, and I'd like to introduce or reintroduce the people here with me who will also be talking with you today. Doug Johnson, my colleague in Service Planning. Stacy Kalsa, who is with our Employer Services Group within our Market Development Division. And John Risha, who wears many hats. As he introduced himself, he is the Director of the King County Transportation District and also the lead staff to the King County Council on transportation, economic, and environmental issues. He wears other hats too, but I'll let him mention those if he's so inclined. So we really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and I'll be spending some time talking about Metro's service reduction proposal and the financial context for that service reduction proposal. Doug Johnson is here with me, and when we get to Q&A, if there are specific service-related questions, Doug is an expert not only in West Seattle but throughout the county on every bus route. And then as well, John Risha then will talk about the King County Transportation District, or the Transportation Benefit District. And then that will be followed by Stacy, who will talk about employer services that Metro has available in support of employers who are seeking to reduce the commute trips taken by single occupant vehicles who may or may not be your employees. Can everybody see the screen okay? It's such a bright sunny day. One of the flip sides of the sun, I guess. So I'd like to start with talking about Metro ridership. For those of you who either ride Metro Transit or see Metro buses, ridership is booming. We experienced record ridership in 2012. It was the highest ever combined Sound Transit and Metro ridership in 2012, with combining for 132 million annual rides. And for 2013, Metro came within just a couple of thousand boardings of hitting our own, without Sound Transit services, our own all-time high. We've also seen major ridership increases in a number of areas. On our rapid ride lines, our bus rapid transit lines, for those of you who may have ridden the C line, can we get a show of hands? Have folks ridden the C line here in West Seattle? Excellent. Well, C line ridership, all of Rapid Ride, including C line, is up 35% since 2010. On the Alaskan Way Viaduct construction corridor, West Seattle to downtown, we've seen a 42% increase. And then on the SR 520 bridge, the newly tolled bridge, we've seen an increase of 40% bus ridership. So let's talk a moment about what's happened financially since 2008. And as business owners, this is not going to be news to any of you. But specifically, talking about what's happened with regard to 2008, the downturn in sales tax, what Metro has done about it, the status of temporary funding, and the resulting budget gap that Metro needs to close. Since 2008, the poor economy has caused a significant shortfall in annual sales tax revenue. And sales tax revenue is part of the lifeblood of Metro. It contributes about half of our Metro revenues. So since 2009, from 2009 to 2015, facing a $1.2 billion with a B budget deficit as a result of the lagging sales tax, Metro and King County have taken numerous actions to reduce Metro's cost, to increase revenue, and to achieve new operating efficiencies. As the economic downturn began, Metro, the King County Council, and the King County Executive took actions to address the declining sales tax and preserve as much transit service as we could. We wanted to keep as much service on the street as we could, and we've been successful in doing that up through this time. The actions have included significant dollars from staff reductions, labor contract savings and program efficiencies. The labor cost savings alone have enabled 10%, have enabled the preservation of 10% of the bus services. We also saved some dollars through selective deletion of certain trips. We drew one-time money from our reserves, from our fleet replacement reserve and our operating reserve, and made steep cuts to capital programs. And as you know, when you draw on one-time money, you draw on them one time. So those need to be replenished. We also generated additional money from revenue-related actions. For those of you who are bus riders or work with bus riders, you'll know that Metro has had several fare changes over the last few years, resulting in an 80% increase in fares since 2008. So our riders have been carrying the burden as well to try to keep as much service on the street as possible. In addition, there is a temporary congestion reduction charge that was levied by the King County Council. That was authorized by the state legislature a couple of years ago. The idea was that this was a temporary charge that would expire in June of 2014, and by that time the legislature would have passed, at least that was the plan, a transportation revenue package. And that has not occurred yet. So the temporary congestion reduction charge, which is a license tab fee, expires at the end of June of this year. So together, all of these actions have totaled approximately $800 million between 2009 and 2013 and resulted in ongoing annual revenue and lowered expenses totaling $148 million. So we've been able to close our annual gap by $148 million through those actions mentioned. So let's talk a bit about the financial picture this year, 2014. After the temporary funding and savings run out in mid-2014, Metro faces a $75 million annual budget gap. And although sales tax is increasing, I hear your voice. Although sales tax revenue is increasing, it hasn't recovered enough to close the budget gap. So the congestion reduction charge, the temporary charge, expires in June, and if no new funding becomes available, Metro is planning to cut up to 600,000 hours, service hours, or about 17% of our transit services. So stable long-term funding is necessary to enable Metro to maintain service and meet our region's growing transportation needs. Instead of cutting service by 17%, based upon our County Council adopted service guidelines, we should be increasing service by 15% in order to meet current needs, in order to meet overloads on buses today, in order to meet and help buses stay on time today. While our elected officials are working toward obtaining that additional sustainable revenue, we have to plan and prepare the service reduction proposal, which is a worst-case financial scenario. And the actual size of the reduction would depend on our finances at the time the cuts would be approved by the King County Council. And reductions would begin, if enacted, would begin in September of this year, September 2014, and would be phased in over the next 4 service changes, so through September 2015. So today we're here to talk about our initial service reduction plan, give an overview. So the $75 million annual gap results in changes that would need to be phased in. So with a loss of up to 600,000 annual service hours, riders all across the county, all through Metro system, would be impacted. Certainly West Seattle would be, from West Seattle to up north to Shoreline, through, of course, City of Seattle, East Side, the entire Metro system. 74 routes would be deleted under the service reduction program. 107 would be reduced or revised, and only 33 would be unchanged. So to prepare the proposal, we took a rational, even-handed approach using our County Council adopted service guidelines. The guidelines are part of the strategic plan and provided the policy direction from the council. And the guidelines enable service change decisions to be based on clear, objective, and a transparent process. The guidelines help Metro make decisions about adding service when we have dollars to invest in new service, and also helps us make decisions about reducing service, as we need to be doing now. And the ultimate goal is to deliver high quality, productive service to transit riders where it's needed most. So when reducing service, our service guidelines call for us to balance productivity, social equity, and geographic value, all while preserving a network that continues to serve as many riders as possible. So Metro used what are termed the 4 reduction priorities in the service guidelines to guide us in developing the proposal to cut up to 600,000 annual hours, which is a very large number of service hours. So we looked at our entire system and started with what's termed Reduction Priority 1. Reduction Priority 1 calls for reducing service on the least productive services in the Metro system, those services that are in the lowest 25% percentile of productivity. We look at duplicative services, peak routes not meeting criteria, routes within corridors that are at or above what we call their target service level. Every corridor within the Metro system has a target service level that's based on a combination of demographics. What are the demographics within that corridor, which includes average income, percent minority distribution. As well, we look at the activity centers within that corridor, and to the extent that there are significant activity centers that would warrant a higher target service level. So Reduction Priority 1, again, we looked at those routes in the lowest 25 percentile and those routes that are at or above their target service level. In other words, with that level of service, they should be performing better. Reduction Priority 1 example in West Seattle includes Route 22, which operates between Arbor Heights, Gatewood, and Alaska Junction. So if we were to be able to achieve 600,000 hours with just Reduction Priority 1, we would stop there. But we couldn't. We had to continue, again, to hit that 600,000 hour target. So we moved down to Reduction Priority 2. And that calls for the restructuring of service to improve efficiency and design of the bus route network. We look at how routes could be modified and combined to serve the greatest number of people in a particular geographic area. So Reduction Priority 2 examples in West Seattle include Route 50, which would be revised to operate along 35th Avenue Southwest, serving Westwood Village, and replacing Route 21 and Route 128, which would also be revised. We had to continue down to Reduction Priority 3, which calls for reducing service on routes that are in the next lowest performers. So those would be those in the 25th to 50th percentile. Examples of Reduction Priority 3 in West Seattle include peak commuter routes 37 and 57, which would be discontinued. And then lastly, we moved down to Reduction Priority 4, which calls for reducing service on routes that are amongst the lowest performers in the lowest 25%, but are below their target service level. In other words, those are routes that do not have the level of service that the guidelines say they should have. So we tried to spare those routes as long as we could, as far as going through the hierarchy of reductions. So again, we prepared the proposal for the worst case financial scenario. And these are serious cuts affecting people that rely on our service every day to get to work, to get to school, to get to medical appointments. And if the proposed cuts were implemented, the result would be that many people would either have to walk farther to get to the bus, would have to transfer where they now have a one-seat ride, experience more overcrowding. Even those routes that would not be reduced will see overcrowding and experience no viable options. Some individuals would be left, in some cases, with no transit options, either throughout the day or during a particular period of the day. So these are very deep and serious cuts. So just talking for a moment a bit more on the proposed service reductions in West Seattle. In addition to the 600,000 hour proposal countywide, we had also proposed the reduction of an additional 45,000 hours in West Seattle and Southwest King County to offset the impending loss of Alaska Way viaduct mitigation funding that we get from WashDOT. Some of you may be aware, Metro has been receiving funding from WashDOT to help mitigate the construction of the viaduct and providing us with dollars to add additional bus service hours, to provide additional bus trips and to mitigate the impact of longer travel times on the bus and schedule adherence. So this additional 45,000 hour package was going to take place in June of this year. But since our initial service reduction proposal was released last fall, WashDOT has committed to providing Alaska Way Viaduct funding, continued funding through the end of 2015, so through the end of next year. And as a result of the WashDOT commitment, we pulled back the 45,000 hour service reduction package, which was scheduled for West Seattle in June. However, even with the WashDOT mitigation funding, West Seattle would still be bearing its portion of the countywide service reduction proposal, its portion of the 600,000 hours that I mentioned. So using the service guidelines, we're currently walking through the complexities to make some adjustments to the original proposal. And with the WashDOT funding, we'll be able to retain some of the services that would have been slated for reduction or elimination in June, including services that are critical to maintaining key connections in areas such as High Point and White Center. It should be noted that many of the lower performing services, those in the bottom 25 percentile that were proposed for a reduction in June of this year and withdrawn from the June implementation, would still be included in the final countywide service proposal for either reduction or elimination. So in West Seattle, considering modifications to the service reduction proposal that we had rolled out in the fall, we're striving to preserve all-day service to areas with the highest ridership, such as the Sea Line, Route 120, as well as maintaining access to transit services to as many riders as possible. And again, although people may have a longer trip on the bus, may have to walk a bit farther to get to the bus, and may involve a transfer where perhaps now they have a one-seat ride. So we're currently working on finalizing the reduction proposal and balancing all of these issues. So a bit about the timeline, where we are. Last November, we launched an extensive public outreach campaign focused on helping members of the public understand the nature and the impacts, the potential impacts of the proposal if it were enacted, and how they might be personally affected. But we also wanted to listen and understand what those impacts are from people. We had a number of ways to reach out to people, including 9 open houses. We had one in West Seattle a few months back. I don't know if anybody here was able to attend that one. We had and the remaining 8 were throughout the county. We also had a community outreach van of street teams at over 25 locations to talk to people who were riding buses, transferring buses, to provide information. Our goal was to get the information out there where people clearly understood what the proposal said. And then a major focus on the web. We have a website that has a tremendous amount of information on each and every service reduction proposal. We also had a survey, and we received thousands of responses from individuals responding on the web. So public feedback received through the process has helped us identify potential ways to soften some of the impacts of the service cuts, but still make the necessary reductions. We'll be documenting and sharing all the input received from jurisdictions and individual citizens with the King County Executive and the King County Council as they make decisions about service reductions. And the proposal, the service reduction package as it may be modified, will ultimately be considered for adoption by the County Council in late April, early May. So based on the direction from the Council, in light of the financial picture at the time, we would begin to phase the reductions in beginning in September 2014 through 2015. But in the meantime, the County Council formed the King County Transportation District this past February. And the Council members make up the board of the Transportation District. On February 24th, the board approved a resolution to put a transportation funding measure up for a public vote on April 22nd. And if the funding measure passes, Metro's proposal to reduce up to 600,000 hours will no longer be necessary and will be withdrawn. So this is a good segue, I think, to John Risha. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. During the Q&A, if there are specific service-related questions, Doug Johnson and I will make every effort to assist. And I'll turn over to John.
Good afternoon. I'm not usually a podium guy, but I'll work with this one. The King County Transportation District, as Marty was suggesting, was formed very recently. What I'm going to share with you today is what was done and a little bit why. I'm not here to offer any kind of a pro or a con statement. It's just merely the facts of what was enacted. And I can answer lots of questions about it, but I can't offer opinion. So there's a line where I'll stop when we get to questions on that piece of it. As mentioned, you've heard about one of the portions of our transportation challenges. We have a funding challenge that has required the King County Council to reduce the Metro budget by the equivalent of 600,000 hours of service. That budget cut has already been made, and it goes into effect in fall of this year, which is what Marty was talking about today. And so the cuts to the transit system, that budget's already been cut to make sure that the agency lives within its financial means. Well, in addition to that particular financial challenge, there's one for King County on the roads side. We operate, manage, and maintain about 1,500 miles of roadways in unincorporated King County. Those roadways would cost about $200 million a year to just maintain and preserve. I'm not talking about any kind of growth of it or any kind of efficiency, just maintain and preserve it. Currently, King County generates approximately $85 million a year to maintain those roads. A little bit of a gap on an annual basis. As a result, they're limiting access on bridges, they're closing roads, and really taking what they have to do from a responsible standpoint to live within the means of the money available, but it's changing the dynamics of transportation in unincorporated King County. On a city level, each of the cities adopts an annual transportation improvement program. On the adopted transportation improvement program for the cities of King County, there is a $4 billion deficit of things that need to be done that they do not have money for. So there's a little bit of a challenge that we've got from a transportation perspective. The county and the cities have been working closely for a number of years with the state to come up with a statewide approach to transportation funding as a whole. In fact, even after they made cuts to the transit system and have been right-sizing the roads department, and cities have been living within their means, they've been working closely with the legislature all the way through this legislative session. And as you may have heard, there was no transportation package enacted by the state legislature this year. Because all of these things were in motion and in place, the cuts are happening, King County then took the final action of, listen, we need to give the voters one last chance to see if they would like to preserve the transit system and provide some funding to transportation overall. The way that structures out is, as you heard, you have a vote on April 22nd. Ballots should be in everyone's hands. I hope you've all received your ballots. But what is on there is Proposition 1, which has 0.1% of sales tax and a $60 vehicle fee. Together, those two sources of revenue generate approximately $130 million per year. There are some unique features about when they did that, and that $130 million is limited to transportation purposes only. It can't be used for police. It can't be used for sewers. It can't be used for general operations. It has to be used for transportation. But what they did put with it was a distribution to take care of our current conditions. They dedicated the first 60% to first fund the transit system as it exists today. It was sized, that 60%, to be able to make sure that Metro and King County did not have to cut the transit service that currently has to be cut. And as Marty has said, King County has told us, if this is approved by the voters, they will withdraw that service reduction, and then the budget will be adjusted to bring that service back into the Metro budget. The other 40% is to be distributed to the cities of King County based on the population. So it's a relative distribution. Each city has a certain amount. They receive their pro rata share based of that 40%. That money can only be spent, that 40%, on things that are on that city's transportation improvement program. Each city makes the decisions on that. This separate district does not get to say, no, you don't get to spend it here, you must spend it on this project versus that project. It is really a local decision, but it has to be on for a transportation project or program that's on their transportation improvement program. They can't just make it up and go spend it someplace else. It has to have gone through that approval process. There are some interesting features about Proposition 1 that are a little bit different. The first of which, it has a significant low-income component to it. It has two features from the low-income standpoint. First of which, it adds a low-income vehicle fee rebate. It's the first time anyone in the state has actually brought one of these forward, where if you meet the state's defined definition for low income, which is 45% of the median income for the county, which roughly equates to about $31,500 per year as an annual income, then you would be eligible to receive $20 of your vehicle fees paid back as a rebate. In addition, you may know that King County has recently added a low-income fare so that people who are of low income can actually ride the bus for a $1.50 fare. Well, if Proposition 1 passes, that $1.50 fare reduces to $1.25. And that'll be that way for the next couple of years. Additionally, there were some features that are important from other standpoints. I talked about early on the issue of the statewide package. Well, the board is very committed to continuing to work with Olympia and bringing forward a statewide package. The politics of whether one happens or what it looks like, that's a whole different issue, but they're committed. In fact, in the proposition, they wrote in a requirement that should the state enact new transportation revenues and the county implement those revenues, then the board is required to meet to consider reducing or eliminating these transportation fees, the 0.1% and the $60. They're looking to see if there's a different or better source of revenue that is identified at a statewide level, then let's utilize the broader package. And that was their commitment, the way that they could do it in commitment to the voters. And the other piece of it is around accountability. Within the proposition, there is a requirement that the cities will be reporting to the district. Here's how much we received, here are the projects we're spending it on. The district will be producing an annual report for the public on scope, schedule, and budget. Here's what your money went to, here's how it's being used, and keep everyone informed. Those two revenue sources are only, if approved, enacted for a 10-year period. There is a sunset associated with it. And so that's really designed to take care of the current needs, the current issues, and address a need not to cut the transit system while providing local road and transportation funding. That's the short story of the components of Proposition 1. I'm happy to answer lots of different questions about different features of it. Important to you, Also, the passenger-only ferry system is not tied into either the transit reductions or the funding associated with Proposition 1. Its funding has a different funding stream and it's kept separate. So with that, I think we're available. Oh, Stacy's going to come up and talk a little bit about employer services.
Thanks. Hello. So as Marty mentioned when he introduced me, I work for King County Metro and Employer Services. And frequently when people think of Metro, they think of buses. But we actually do a lot more than that. And my group works with employers to help them develop transportation options for their employees to help them, have other ways to get to work besides driving alone. And, we're talking a lot about, the bus situation, these potential cuts that are coming up. And just, in general, my group always thinks that there are so many options, there are so many ways for people to get around. And sometimes the bus works and sometimes it doesn't. And so I want to sort of put that out there that, there are many ways to encourage people to get around, and we are available to help you with those if that's of interest to you. So one thing that I want to mention really quick is carpooling or vanpooling. We have a group called Rideshare Operations that manages those programs, and that's a really great way to help people figure out different ways to get around if the bus isn't an option. And actually, as of April 1st, Metro has nearly 14,000 commuter vans in operation with over 10,000 riders. So it's a really big program. We have the biggest van pool program in the nation. And then, as an employer, how many of you guys have transportation programs for your employees? Some of you, great. So there are a lot of ways to do that, and some of them are very, very low cost. From allowing people to you purchase a bus pass for them and allow them to pay for the pass using pre-tax dollars. So there are a lot of ways that you can help your employees save money without it being a big financial impact to your organization. And then simple things like having a guaranteed ride home, so if an emergency comes up in the middle of the day, your employees have a way to get home if they have chosen to not drive alone to work. And then I would also quickly mention about biking to work, because with this beautiful weather we have outside, we're getting into sort of bike season. And Bike Month is in May. I brought some posters. If there are any of you who are interested, you're welcome to take some of those. Bike Month is for the entire month of May. There is a Bike to Work Day on Friday, May 6th. It's a really great time to, inform people and encourage people to, choose alternative ways to get around. So I prepared a little handout, which is also over there, of different ways that you as employers can help your employees with various different commute modes or non-commute modes like telecommuting or a compressed work week. So anyway, lots of options out there, and we are certainly available to help. I put some websites with different resources on there and ways to get a hold of us if that's something of interest to you. So I think we'll take questions now.
So first, let's go ahead and give a hand to our speakers today. So we'll have time for questions from the membership after. What we did was we actually submitted 4 questions to the group here in advance. A team of us got together and thought, what would we like to ask these folks? So they're going to answer those 4 questions first, and then we'll turn it over to the membership for questions. So.
Thank you. So the first question is, there's been some conflicting information regarding what size of fare increase would be necessary to close the funding gap rather than addressing it with this proposition. We've seen numbers ranging from 50 cents to $3. What is King County Metro's estimate of the fare increase that would be required? So as I've mentioned previously, Metro has raised rider fares 4 times by a total of 80% in recent years, since 2008. And as John had mentioned, the King County Council has approved additional fare changes that will take effect March 1st of 2015. So in addition to the 4 fare increases that have already occurred, there's another one scheduled for next year. So all fares for regular Metro service will go up by 25 cents, and the fare for our Access paratransit service will go up by 50 cents. So to fully close Metro's budget gap, Metro fares would have to go up by a minimum of $2 per trip, or a one-way adult base fare of $4.25. But it's important to note, based on our historic experience raising our fares, a 25-cent fare increase would raise an additional $10 million in annual revenue per year. So to close a $75 million budget gap, if you multiply 25 cents times 8, we would be at $2 or more. And there you get into the dynamic of, okay, hypothetically, if you raise the fare to $2, which would be the largest single fare increase Metro has ever done, the actual ridership loss and rate of return of revenue is not known. We would likely lose significant ridership by raising the fare that amount. So it's very difficult to pinpoint a number in terms of what that actual fare would need to be to close the gap. If it were increased upwards of $4 plus, it would be amongst the highest bus fares for regular bus service in the United States. So that's our overall response. There was another question. One question that's come up repeatedly in comments that I haven't found an answer to is where does the contract with Metro's drivers stand? Last year they voted down a contract proposal with a pay freeze and 2 years of low increases. I couldn't even find a vote without going into union newsletters, and it didn't look like a new contract has come forth since then. Are they still talking, or was something quietly implemented? So the short answer is the collective bargaining process is continuing. We're currently in mediation talks with ATU, Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 587. And the mediation step is consistent with the collective bargaining process for transit employees as established by state laws. The phase of the contract talks began in February, and the negotiations are being facilitated by a mediator. And right now there's no specific timeline for this phase of the negotiation. The third question is Seattle is in a dire situation when it comes to the need for grade separated transit to downtown, and the problem is getting worse. What is Metro doing to address this urgent need? I believe this was focused on West Seattle. So we at Metro continually work with WashDOT and SDOT, the Seattle Department of Transportation, to identify appropriate transit priority investments such as dedicated bus lanes and signal priority. We're working with WashDOT, I mentioned the mitigation funding, and also with the City of Seattle to ensure the buses keep moving during the construction of the SR 99 viaduct construction, viaduct replacement, and the tunnel construction. Of course, much of the downtown is impacted and will be impacted by the actual demolition of the viaduct when that occurs after the tunnel opens, and of course continued central Seattle waterfront construction. Metro is evaluating a number of possible pathways to get buses from West Seattle and into downtown, and also looking at possible priority treatments to keep buses moving during the interim periods, closely with SDOT, the City of Seattle, and with WashDOT. Metro and the City of Seattle have evaluated options for a grade separated pathway for downtown, for transit into downtown, in particular a potential Lander Street overcrossing, for those of you who have crossed a very busy railroad at grade crossing, that would allow buses to bypass the existing backups that occur when trains come through across Lander Street. The overpass would cost an estimated $200 million, and including transit lanes and other improvements. Funding is not currently available to support this investment, but that's something that we're all continuing to explore with our partners. Lastly, West Seattle is one of the high-capacity transit corridors that Sound Transit is looking at in its long-range plan. I don't know how many of you may have been involved or visited any of the public meetings. Sound Transit is developing amendments to their long-range plan for potential additional high-capacity transit, which could be light rail, could be busways, and that long-range plan is ultimately adopted by the Sound Transit Board, would inform an ST3 vote in the future. That hasn't been set yet. So we're working closely with our partners. We're doing what we can in the short term to keep traffic moving, and of course in the long term that will take much more significant investment to be able to address that. And then I'll turn it over to Doug Johnson to respond to, there was a fourth question from DJ. Is DJ here?
He's not.
He's not? Oh, okay. Well, we'll respond to the question anyway.
All right, so DJ is the apartment manager of Nova Apartments, which is just around the corner from 35th and Alaska, where a lot of the bus routes come together before they head into town. So his question was, the corner of 35th and Alaska, a huge draw for those looking to reside in our community is in close proximity to public transportation. How will the current routes in this area be affected, and if service cutbacks are being proposed and approved, will residential zone parking be available to residents in our area? So there are 5 routes that go by there now, some major routes, the C Line, the 21, the 21 Express, the 50, 55. Of those 5 routes, the 21, which is the local all-day route up 35th and into town through Soto, would be discontinued. The other commuter routes would still operate. The C Line would continue to operate, the 21 Express and the 55, although there would probably be a few less trips during the commute period. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what's going to happen in that area around 35th and Alaska with fewer trips. Those some commuters may look elsewhere to get on those buses because, as Marty said, with less service, the routes that remain and the trips that remain are going to be more crowded. And 35th and Alaska is kind of the highest peak ridership point before those routes get into town. So it's hard to say what would happen with reductions. I imagine there'll still be lots of commuters that try to find parking in that area to get on the bus. It's possible that some commuters from some of the other routes that are discontinued, like the 37 and the 57 were mentioned, if they don't have those routes in their areas, they might try driving to 35th and Alaska to park. But obviously there's just a limit to how much parking they can find there. So very possibly commuters will start to search elsewhere to other little neighborhoods that they can park and access the bus. So it's hard to say. And in terms of putting in the last part of the question about the residential parking zone system, that really would be a Seattle City Department of Transportation decision, not a Metro decision. So.
We'll open it up to questions from the membership. We have a few minutes left for some questions from the membership. So anybody have any questions for the panel today? That's it? Wow.
I have a question.
One question, okay.
So we talked a lot about reduction in routes and a little bit about the union contract negotiations, but what other things are happening to increase efficiency, like administrative cuts or planning or equipment, other than cutting ridership and routes?
Thank you for the question. Operating more efficiently is an ongoing process. We're entering into the budget development for the next biennium. We are always looking at, first of all, before any positions, any new positions are looked at, they go through a very rigorous justification. And over the last few years, not only have new positions not been added, but in fact there have been a significant number of positions that have not been filled, either not been filled or a reduction in force. So overall, that process continues. The efficiency process. We have a handout at the table. In fact, we have a number of handouts that we hope that people will take them. It's that much less we'll have to carry back. But seriously, there are a lot of good information. There's one handout that specifically addresses all of the measures that Metro has taken and is continuing to take to look at how we can save every dollar not spent on direct bus service is a dollar that has to go through rigorous justification.
So
Let me answer real quickly, just to put some numbers and some scale to what Marty's talking about. Over the past 5 years, Metro has been in this process of trying to address a $1.2 billion gap over that period of time. They have gone through a complete realignment of the policy structure. How do you provide transit service? It's now corridor-based instead of the formula of 40-40-20, and how do you add service? They've gone through a process of looking at how they deliver bus service and replanned how they do it. So they're not running as many empty buses, and they're shortening the time down to what's really required. And they've done a lot from that standpoint. Plus they're using Lean to realign how they deliver services internally, including an ongoing effort around vehicle maintenance, and there continues to be dollars saved. What that equates to in all of the efforts, including the employees who gave back their COLA one of the years, all of those things combined amount to about $148 million a year. So there's been a significant change in their operating environment to try and save transit. By way of contrast, to the north and to the south, Community Transit and Pierce Transit to the south both cut their transit service by 37% during a time when King County did not, and in fact implemented Rapid Ride during that decline in revenues. So that's just by way of difference. It was a very different approach that Metro went through to really realign and become a much more efficient agency. Are they done? No, they're not done. And with my council staff hat on, I'm sure they're not done. And they're committed to continuing to do more on that front. But they've made some really great strides. And in fact, their number of riders per passenger mile is actually on the growth. So they're really getting that efficiency up and delivering a much stronger system.
Really good information, thank you.
Are there any plans for any type of park and ride, or is that Department of Transportation, or do you know?
Are you talking specific in West Seattle?
I certainly like to know West Seattle, but I guess for broader, if there's anywhere in Greater Seattle here.
Right now, the Regional Transit Committee, which provides policy guidance to King County Metro, has asked for a study of access to transit, which very much looks at things like park and ride needs. Because if we think about what is a park and ride, it's almost a substitute for some of the density in certain areas. It allows people to come together and allows Metro to serve that population much more efficiently. There are some different ways of approaching it, and I'll speak to Seattle for just a moment. They have some different views of where park and ride should be and how they should be utilized. And they're not as favorable towards having new park and ride facilities within the city of Seattle. So that's something that is an ongoing conversation with the city of how do we make sure we can bring people together and get that transit service to the population within reasonable distances. So it's not much of an answer, but there's still definitely a conversation ongoing.
Can I do a quick follow-up and then get to Jim here? So the West Seattle Junction, we have cooperative parking facilities in West Seattle Junction. There's 4 parking lots there. Would there be any type of consideration for maybe a public-private type partnership if we could get the city of Seattle to agree to some zoning changes?
If. I think that's probably the one of the biggest conditions. And so one of my other many hats that I do wear is I'm also staff to the King County Ferry District. And one of our biggest challenges over here is we can't find parking near our ferry terminal. And that's the big challenge is you've got to have a way for people to access the boats, you've got to have a way for people to access transit. And that's the big question is how can we aggregate people, get them together in a park and ride or parking facility that brings that distance down to a reasonable level. So I think it's one of the linchpins is a great partnership and conversation with the city of Seattle could really help facilitate that.
You talk about 600 hours, 507 hours of reduction. Can you aggregate hours of service to dollars? Per hour, 600,000 hours of service, how many dollars? I assume every hour is not equal.
Roughly speaking, well, from a planning perspective, roughly speaking, we use about $100 per hour for service plus the capital costs. So that 600,000 hours equates to about $60 million plus about $15 million per year for capital. So that's where the 75 million figure, and that's what the budget was adjusted by.
Okay, and if you have the reduction, and it fails, you have to reduce these 600,000 hours, where are you going to get the excess buses? Or will it be excess buses?
The buses have already been cut from the system, and so they're actually they're at the end of their useful life, and there's been a decision already not to replace them. So they're out of the stream already, and so they wouldn't be replaced. And that's, Metro has more than 1,300 buses, and there's a constant flow of replacement, and they've reduced that number of buses out of the system already, which is why, if this is approved, you actually have to buy new buses to get them into that new stream.
Thank you.